So we're ready to start our next unit, which is our algebra unit. Before we get started, we need to talk about some important vocabulary words. The first word is variable. A variable is any letter that represents a number that can change. If you look at the diagram below in our example, our variable is x. So you need to label your x with the word variable. Okay, another word is term. A term is part of an algebraic expression separated by a plus or minus sign. If you look at our example, we have three terms. 2x is a term, 5 is a term, and negative 11 is a term. So you can write that on the line that says terms. So let's talk about what an algebraic expression is. It is a mathematical statement with at least one variable and operation. So if you look at our example, we have two expressions. 2x plus 5 is an expression, and negative 11 is an expression. All right, in our algebra unit, we will be solving equations, so we need to know what an equation is. An equation is a mathematical sentence that has two equal expressions. So if you look at our example, our two expressions are set equal to each other, and that would be considered an equation. And notice it says it needs an equal sign, so make sure you write that in. Okay, our next vocabulary word is inequality. An inequality is a mathematical sentence with one expression that is less than or is greater than another expression. So we're filling in those words, is less than or is greater than. So it needs a less than sign, greater than sign, less than or equal to sign, or greater than or equal to sign. Okay, so at this point you should have all your vocabulary and the parts of our example labeled. The parts that we did not label yet, so look at your example, we need to label the coefficient. That is the number in front of the variable. So label that number 2, coefficient, and then our constants. Those are the numbers that are in our equation, like 5 and negative 11.
So now that we've learned all of our vocabulary that we're going to use for our algebra unit, we're going to go over how we can translate expressions and equations. So math is really kind of like its own language. We can translate an algebraic expression or an equation into words, and you can even go back again. So this chart right here has a lot of the common words that you will see when you're translating. These are clue words that can help you decide what operation you're doing, if you're adding, if you're subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. So that first box is all about addition. You'll see that we have sum, total, plus, increased by. And what's really important is that more than right there. Notice how that has a star next to it. That's because more than is a very special kind of phrase. In the subtraction box, we have two more that have stars next to them. You've got less than, and you've got subtracted from. All of these terms that have stars next to them are what we call turnaround phrases. Notice down at the bottom of the chart, we have a whole box that says turnaround phrase. So more than, less than, and subtracted from are very, very special. Anytime you see those are called turnaround phrases, and that means that you have to change the order of how you write down that mathematical expression or equation. The other important phrases that I want to point out is a parentheses phrase. The other type of special phrase that we have are called parentheses phrase, and that's right next to that turnaround phrase box. So anytime you see the words times the sum of or times the difference, that's a clue that your statement should have parentheses in it because we're using a group. We're using that sum. Underneath that chart, you'll see that we have some equation and inequality symbols. So these are very important symbols that you're going to see as you are translating your expressions. So if you see the words is or equals or even is the same as, that means you're going to use an equal sign. And then the other thing that I want to point out is that your less than and your greater than symbol, you'll notice that less than is also in the subtraction box. But if you see the words is less than all together, if you see the words is with less than all together, is less than, or is greater than, or is less than or greater than to, whatever, all of those that have is with it, that means that you're actually going to use one of those symbols, not a plus or a minus sign. So let's take a look. We have 3 phrases at the bottom of your sheet. Let's look at this first one. It can look like a lot of words when you're starting looking at it. So the first thing that I always try to do is look for numbers. And all of my numbers, I'm going to draw a box around. So as I read this, look for numbers. 3 minus 7 times a number equals 10. Well, the first number I saw was the number 3. So I'm going to put a box around 3. And you can even write down that number on top of that box. So go ahead and put the number 3 on top of that box. And now I'm looking for more numbers. Well, the next number that I see is the number 7. So I'm going to put a box around 7 and the number 7 right on top. So just so I can see it. The next number that stands out to me is 10. So I'm going to put a box around 10. And again, I'm going to put the number 10 right on top. Now this is where a lot of people miss it. There's actually another number that's in this sentence. And it literally says a number. When you see a number, that's going to be a number, but we have to use a variable to stand in for it. So let's go ahead and pick x for our variable here. If I don't know what number it is, I'm going to put x to hold its spot. Once you have a box around all of your numbers, then I'm going to go through and underline my clues. The first clue that I see is minus. So I'm going to underline that, and I go back to my chart. You'll see that minus is in my subtraction box, so I can put a subtraction right on top. Then I see the next clue is times, underline that. If I look in my box, times is with multiplication, so I'm going to put a little dot for multiplication. Remember, we don't want to use an x for multiplication now that we're in our algebra unit. And the last clue that I see is equals. I'm going to underline that and put an equal sign right above. Now I've got all my clues, I know what all of them mean, and I can go ahead and put them together. So let's double check. Do I have any turnaround phrases? No, I did not see any turnaround phrases. Look for parentheses phrases. Didn't see those either. So I can keep it in the exact same order that it is. So I'm going to start out with the number 3, then a subtraction, then 7. And actually, instead of putting that multiplication dot in between, I'm actually going to squish together the 7 and the x. Remember, anytime you have a number squished up with a variable, that means that you can multiply them, and then equals 10. And it's as simple as that. You're just picking apart the pieces. Let's go ahead and try out the next one. Look for those numbers, and we're going to draw boxes. 5 times the sum of a number and 8. The first number I see is 5, so I'm going to put a box around that. The next number that I see is a number, so I'm going to put a box around that one. And then the last number that I see is 8, so again, another box. And on top of those, let's just go ahead and write down the actual number. So on top of 5, I'm going to put the number 5. On top of a number, I'm going to put a variable. We're going to use x again, and then 8 on top of 8. Now let's look for those clues. Now, I'm noticing right off the bat that I see times, but it keeps going. It's not just times alone. It says times the sum of. So I'm going to underline that whole thing together because that's really important. Now that word and, that's not really a clue word here. I'm going to use it, but it doesn't say anything. It's not like it says addition or subtraction or multiplication or division. So I'm just going to leave that right now. So let's look at that times the sum of. That's a very, very special phrase. It's not a turnaround phrase. It's a parentheses phrase. So I'm going to put some parentheses there because I know it's got to have parentheses. And then look at that word in there, sum. Sum is a clue that I can use addition. So I'm going to write that down so I have it as a little kind of a hint. Now, since I don't have any turnaround phrases, I can keep it in the same order just like it is. So I'm just going to start out with the number 5. And then when we multiply, we can squish it up next to it. So times the sum, I'm going to squish up next to those parentheses. Then I'm going to put the first number that I saw, which was x. And then I know that plus means to add, so I'm going to put a plus sign, an addition sign, and then 8. And don't forget to close out those parentheses. Let's check that I have everything in here. I have all 3 numbers that I wrote down, I have my parentheses, and I have a plus sign for sum. So I have everything that was in that statement. So this is, again, an expression because it doesn't have an equal sign in it. All right, last example. I have a number less than 67 is 22. So let's draw a box around all the numbers. The first one I see is a number. The next one I see is 67. The last one I see is 22. Now I'm going to write down those numbers right on top. Remember, anytime you see a number, you can use a variable. I just always like to pick x, but you can pick other ones. 67, write that out, and 22, write that out. Now I'm looking for those clues. The first clue that I see is less than. Remember, less than is a subtraction clue, but it's also got a star next to it. It is a turnaround phrase, so I'm going to draw those arrows. That's a turnaround phrase. Do not forget that. That's super important. And then there's another little clue almost hidden in there. It's the word is. So underline that. Remember, anytime you see the word is all on its own, that's a clue that you are going to use an equals symbol. So as we write this, we have to be really, really careful of that turnaround phrase. Even though they write x first, I have to turn it around. So I'm going to switch the spots. The x and the 67 switch places. I'm going to put 67 first, then my subtraction sign, then x, and now I can close it out with the equals and the 22. Now, even though I had a turnaround phrase there, I don't need to change where the equals and the 22 are. They're still at the end. The only thing that gets turned around are the 2 numbers around that less than phrase. So the x and the 67 switch spaces. All right, that goes ahead and concludes our translating notes. If you flip over your sheet, there is a practice page, and it is a puzzle. So as you're looking at it, make sure that you are reading them carefully, drawing boxes around your numbers, and underlining those clues.